Hello everyone, welcome to this next episode on Anybody Can Develop series as part of my Anubhav Learning series sessions. By far in these sessions, we discussed about the best practices, the naming convention for design, develop, as well as stability of our application. Today we will interestingly discuss the most important part, performance, and my personal favorite topic. So what are all the guidelines and processes which we should follow while building an application which really brings in more better performance for your app? What are all the most interesting and important things which you should keep it in mind? Together with that, we also discuss about a function which we use very often called attach init in index HTML. Many of you have dropped in a question to me, Anubhav, what is the purpose of attach init function in the index HTML or FLP sandbox.html? So any HTML file, usually we have this SAP UI getCode.attach init function. We will discuss about that in detail. We'll talk about asynchronous loading of libraries and the objects. So let's move on and discuss about these guidelines. So more about performance now. So again, coming to the main point about performance, you can see these are all certain guidelines or probably the most important practices which we should use while coding an SAP UI5 application, be it a freestyle application or maybe generated from template and then further on extending it based on your need. So now first one comes is asynchronous loading. What is an asynchronous loading and what is a synchronous loading? So if you want to understand a basically very simple example of synchronous versus asynchronous, it is pretty easy to actually explain that. So we will just try to understand that with the small sequence diagram. So let me explain you what is a synchronous and what is an asynchronous process. So let's take an example of a synchronous process. So maybe let's say person A is going to call person B. So here you can consider maybe I have a method A which is actually calling method B, or maybe I have a class A which is calling class B. Yeah. So I have a module here. I have a class A and I have a class B. Both are two different classes and they both are communicating with each other. How are they communicating? Of course, one class calls another class. Now, if I just draw it like this, the sequence diagram, this is the time dimension on which the sequence of calls will happen. And let's also consider class C, maybe. Yeah, maybe it could be class B itself or class C. And now each of these classes, which we have it here, they will have different methods inside, okay, which you will be calling. So let's say class A, you can consider this as your index HTML. Class B, you can consider something called sap.m library. And then you can consider class C as maybe sap.ui.core library. Okay, just consider that example. Now what happens in index HTML, you trying to call a button. Okay, you say, hey, please load a button for me, and you make a call like this, and now the button loading starts. So basically this index HTML is running in the browser, and as long as this SAPM library loads this button class from the CDN or maybe from local in your browser, the system will go for a wait. Your browser gets logged, which means your browser has absolutely no activity at this point. User cannot interact with browser because there is a call which is gone out to some other module, and this module is currently doing its processing. Hence, the browser cannot process any other request at this time. Your thread is logged actually. So, which means the user cannot interact with browser. And now let's say this call takes about 2 minutes. So for the 2 minute is actually an ideal time for user. User would probably get frustrated with your app. Now, at the same time, if you have a further call to maybe class C, then once the class B method gets over, only then a call will go to class C method. Okay. And now the C method again takes some time, maybe let's say 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And during this time, again, user is idle. Basically, browser doesn't allow user to touch the screen. Basically, it gets completely locked, and which is actually happens in ABAP-based application. If you observe, when you press enter key, as long as your PAI code is running, user has literally no control on SAP GUI screen. Yeah, typical ABAP example. Now, that's exactly called synchronous processing. In a synchronous processing, until the given operation is complete, user cannot access the application. User will see kind of a loading indicator, or user would see, okay, something is going on, and user got to wait. User got to wait until everything gets over. Moreover, another disadvantage is the sequential calls of functions. You see here this call, this species which is being made. Let's say I call it call X, maybe I call X here, and then I have a call Y. So if you see here, Y can only start once the X is complete. Okay, that's exactly will happen in a synchronous processing. And this is again explained in my one of the video about JavaScript IO. So you can watch that video on YouTube, but you can also understand it here pretty easily. So Y can only start once X gets completed. That's a synchronous processing example. And as long as these processings are happening, user has no control. Now, what is an asynchronous processing? In an asynchronous way of processing, it doesn't guarantee, or it doesn't say that you got to lock the browser. We basically, in asynchronous processing mode, what typically happens, your user doesn't have to wait. Okay, user can keep interacting with your application, and that application, it will keep on interacting basically with that app. Let me just explain that sequence now here in asynchronous processing. So if somebody made a call to a method, the method is not no more waiting. So basically it doesn't wait. There is, it's not waiting anymore. The method now progresses and immediately calls Y. And the beauty of this approach is system doesn't wait as long as this X is complete or as long as this Y is complete. So basically, in the advantage of asynchronous processing is multiple things can actually get executed in parallel. So you see the call for X is gone, and I'm really not waiting here to start my Y. I immediately tell system, hey, please start my Y. Okay, so now this is a little different style, the way your conventional programming works. Okay, that could be a little tricky for you to understand, but this is exactly how asynchronous processing happens. And that's why the JavaScript approach of coding is actually a non-blocking asynchronous IO. This is why it's called non-blocking because user which you have here, who is actually connected to your browser, will don't have to wait. So user clicks on a button, a call is being made, and this is an asynchronous call. Immediately user can click on another button, or user can play around with some data. But this at times the results are so fast, they comes up to you that you don't even feel it as an end user. But basically your browser never gets logged here. You will always have access to the browser. You can interact with the UI still, and this call is gone and this is processing somewhere. Now you say, Anubhav, if this is the case, we understand that it's an advantage that user doesn't get locked. Point one, point two is multiple calls is sent, and then everything is processing in almost in parallel, which is good. But what about this result which we wanted to get, and then we wanted to display that to the UI? How would that happen then? There has to be some code. Suppose I make a call to some table called Mara, and I say, hey, please load this material number I'm giving you and load the data for this material. What about when the data comes out? Now understand guys, the point at which data comes in, basically this time is not fixed. If I say the time taken to complete this operation, it depends on multiple factors like network speed, your laptop speed, your internet speed, your ISP, how far are you sitting from server, how close are you sitting, region, then your server speed, your server load, network traffic, then traffic between the database and the server itself, within server processing, all these things, how many concurrent requests are there, is there any lock or not. So it depends on a lot of factors. So you cannot actually say that, okay, I would do something to see and assume that data have come after 300 seconds, yeah, or 3 seconds. You cannot assume that. And that's why there is a provisioning in JavaScript for there are two major features to handle this result, which comes back later on, using asynchronous functions again. So once this result comes back, there is something called asynchronous function which gets executed, and these asynchronous functions can get executed by two ways. First technique is called callback functions. Okay, this is one approach, callback, and the second is called promises. Okay, so if you want to ever do any kind of asynchronous processing, you clearly see the advantage here. Browser doesn't get locked, maximum number of operations happens in parallel, and the overall speed of the execution becomes very fast, and the app loading time reduces because most of the things are processing in parallel, and you would see a very smooth transition between your actions with the UI. Okay, it is very smooth. You don't even feel like you are sitting or you are contacting server to load something. And when the data comes, you will trigger either a callback or a promise, which then in turn triggers a function where you can write your code. So this whole paradigm of programming in JavaScript is also achieved using a technique called AMD technique. Okay, AMD is actually stands for asynchronous module definition. In context of UI5, we use AMD syntax to define our objects, define our modules, so that system does most of these processings asynchronously. When UI5 was initially introduced, at that point of time, these benefits were not utilized. I mean, I'm talking like 5 year back story. But now we actually use the AMD like syntax in UI5, and this is what I do use in my training. And most of the trainers, which I do see, unfortunately, or even the corporate trainers, they are still adhering to the old syntax. And they're still teaching you old ways, old conventional ways. When they learned UI5 5 year back, since then many things have changed. They are actually not adapting to it. And this is why it's so critical and important, guys. You choose your trainer wisely. So it's so important that uh, things are mixed up and things are very confusing here, that you really would never know that the person who is going to give you the right, give you the teachings, is this giving you the right teachings, or is this person giving you some kind of very old knowledge which probably you use and you will get into a trouble in your project. So choose your trainer wisely. Now, in my trainings, I make sure that I cover latest and greatest concept. And since last 1.5 year or about 2 year, ever since the syntax was introduced, we are actually using this syntax in my course. So those who have taken training from me, you would have seen this syntax. I will explain it in a minute. What do we do actually? And that's the syntax called EMD-like syntax. So I hope you got a good, fair idea why we do what we do. That's so important, because once you understand the roots of it, your confidence on the technology improves really at a big level. Yeah, and then you can actually achieve big targets. You can actually inspire others as well to understand things right, and you would get that right confidence to build the stuff. So now coming here, what was that old versus new approach for so I would say, what are the benefits of having an asynchronous based programming? So I would say, what are the benefits? So I would just quickly write down the benefits here. The first benefit of this asynchronous programming, or AMD like syntax, which we will be seeing in a minute, is when the browser loads resources asynchronously, it doesn't freeze. Yeah. That's the first advantage. Second advantage is when these apps can load the resources like libraries, components, modules in parallel, which contributes to overall performance improvement. Next comes is the app loads more smoothly, and user will feels a very good um, appeal when app loads. These are all some benefits of asynchronous way of coding, yeah, or asynchronous loading. And how this is achieved, what are all the game rule of this game now? The first rule of the game is AMD like syntax. I'm now talking in context of SAP UI5. So AMD like syntax, here we define modules. The module definitions should be based on asynchronous module definition syntax. Now let's understand that. So before guys, when this was not introduced, what we used to do, we used to use loading for module using jQuery.sap.require to define a module. Any JavaScript module you want to define, you got to use this. And if you want to use a module, okay, or sorry, this is was to use a module, I would say use a module when you want to load a module which is already there. Okay, so you will modularize your entire app in small artifacts, and this all, as you all have learned in my course, how do we do that. So this was the old syntax. Even still I see some apps which are built like very early stages of UI5, though those is still using this old syntax, and I guide my developers to basically convert this to new AMD like syntax in my company, where they should do it to make sure that they get the benefit out of this new AMD syntax. Really not something which is new, as radically new, but yes, it's quite a long time it's been there in out, and but we don't know the meaning till today. Yeah, many of us just coding and we really never care about, is this the right practice or not, is this really a gold standard. So now I think it's more clear for all of you why shouldn't you use this option. And next is a recipe to define a new module. You want to declare a module, and these two techniques are synchronous techniques, which means if you are writing, let's say, require 1 2 3, first one gets loaded, and once the one is finished loading, then only second gets loaded. So that's a complete synchronous, and browser completely gets logged in that period of time, literally no activity which user can do, and there is no parallelization indeed there for operations, and it will keep on waiting for the syntax. But now when it look at the new syntax, AMD syntax, to define or to declare a new module, we use sap.ui.define. That's what we use. And then we load all the dependencies here. Now this module is dependent on other modules. So you can put all those dependencies over here on the top in this section. And we already learned this syntax in our training more in detail. You are already aware of it, but today you're getting more depth information about it. Again, I remind you that these videos are for the learners who are advanced level, those who are might already taken training from me or somewhere else where your guru or your trainer would have taught you these concepts ideally, utilizing these things. But today we are understanding more in terms of performance perspective why it is so important. So please consider that this is something I'm not going to cover in detail, because this is already, if you go back to our project and see here, we have actually used the same syntax all the time. See, while defining component, controllers, any file which we created, any JS file, we actually use the AMD like syntax from day one. Yeah, that's called scaffolding. Yeah, you remember that? So that's the main reason, and this is integral part of my trainings. Always I make sure I use latest and greatest syntax so you never get these problems. Then what happens once these module gets loaded, and now that time is not definite, kitna time lega ye dependencies load on me, we don't know. 10 second, 5 second, 3 second, we don't know. But once it's loaded, then only I should start my processing to do something else. So that's why there's now functionality called callbacks. And callback is a function which will get called basically once all the modules which are given in dependency gets loaded, and their dependent objects of dependency objects will be inputted here. Objects will be passed here in this function, and that's how exactly this whole story will build around. So that's the syntax to create a new module. And if you just go back again and see, you see we created controllers, component JS, all of that with the same technique. This is the callback function, and these are all the module definitions which you are reusing. So that's exactly SAP UI defined us. And then we have SAP.require. This is the another syntax which is to load the required dependency. Again, same syntax, or any dependency you have, just put them in here, and then we can use, there's a callback function which gets called, and all the dependent objects are passed inside. That's how we do. So now the first one which you see is defining the dependencies. So here, this is MD-like syntax. So in this, basically dependencies are loaded in advance. And then before actually executing module, and then the callback function is invoked. So that way, if you are defining 20 modules, all of them parallelly starts loading, and system does not really wait. So the moment system encounters this, it sends a call to load these dependencies. And once the dependencies are loaded, system asynchronously calls this. So it doesn't stop there and wait, okay, मैं wait कर रहा हूँ कब आएगा. It doesn't do that. Okay, it keeps on sending these module calls one by one to the required load the required dependencies, and it doesn't really wait. So it doesn't lock your browser, and all of this processing happens asynchronously. So first module, second module, third module, fourth module, and by the time I'm loading fourth module, first module got loaded. So fine, which is very good. I call the callback of first module, everything works. Then second module, and so on. This is a complete asynchronous way of processing. The second option here, which you see here, it's more like dependencies are again resolved on demand after initial module execution. Okay, so they are resolved on demand. So basically, why you use SAP UI require is because at times, guys, when you want to use a button, when you want to use, let's say, a message API, and I don't know whether user click on this button or not. There's a button, on click of the button, message comes. So why do I need to load the message box module? Initially, when I start my app, I don't need, because user may click, may not click on the button. But when user clicks on the button, that is the time I would really need to load the message box dependency. So in that case, this is basically also known as dynamic dependency. And that's the another syntax SAP required. So we have actually used these two syntaxes as part of course. I think it makes it more concrete for you guys now. Why did we use what we used in our course? But this is integral part of your blood now, because we have covered since day one the same syntax. I didn't even teach these days in my courses these things, but if you have taken courses on UI5 like 5 years back from me, then maybe I have taught you this syntax very old, long back. But the day SAP released this syntax, I am a big fan of following through all the latest updates and greatest updates, and adapt myself to the latest and greatest code, and bring that that knowledge out of the box for all of you in my trainings. So researching all the different blogs, internet blog posts, attending different events, talking to people, talking to experts, discussing with everybody, possibility to explore on blogs, SDN, updates on UI5 SDK, library updates. I keep on checking, keep on reading. So as a trainer, it's so important that you keep yourself updated. Have you seen my video on how to become a good trainer? If you've not, please go back. So those trainers who are watching this video, I would strongly recommend to go back and on YouTube and watch my video on how to become an effective trainer. So you got to first inspire yourself to inspire others, right? So that's so important for you. as an important seed for your learning. You have to bow the seed yourself first, your learning, and then you can claim yourself to be a good trainer. So, and also try to focus on the goals of students first rather than focusing on personal goals. It's very unfortunate, a lot of corporate trainers and a lot of online trainers which I see, they just only, their only intention is to focus on their personal financial goals or maybe whatever goals they have in mind. They really ignore kind of this learning, and after getting a little bit of popularity, they ignore students and they ignore learning, they ignore investing in themselves, their self learning, self development, and then that is something which makes them outdated, which you should never do if you really want to get into this profession of teaching. So that's one advice from my side. Again, the details are covered in another video. Please go and watch that. Okay, coming back. So that's the first AMD like syntax, the new approach for performance improvement. You should always use this new syntax. Second important part is library loading. If you come back, if you ever have a freestyle Fiori, a freestyle means you have index HTML. So if you have index HTML as launcher, which is actually known to be freestyle Fiori apps, basically you are not launching your app via the launchpad. If you're launching the app via the launchpad, that the one which I'm going to explain now is going to be taken care by launchpad itself. You don't have to worry. But if you're using a freestyle Fiori app where you have index HTML to launch your app, in that case, you got to handle this important property here. So all the libraries today on UI5, SAP M, SAP UI layout, those libraries with the bootstrap, they all loaded synchronously today, and all the other modules which you have, they all loaded synchronously today when you use this bootstrap. So what is happening, I'll also show you in the system. So I have an index HTML, and you see I'm loading these certain libraries and then the themes and all these resources. So all these resources which you see, they all loaded synchronously, which means one after another. पहले पहला load होगा, उसके बाद वो खत्म होगा, उसके बाद दूसरा, which actually increases little bit of initializing or initial loading time for your app. At times you would have seen a blank screen. Fiori app is loading, 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 and really it takes a lot of time. Now this is the most important grid, guys, I would say, which is going to stop the nuclear reaction. You remember, I remember in my school days when I learned about nuclear reactor first time. So when they attack with an electron on this on the atom of the atom of this nuclear product, then it splits into two atoms and then it produces more energy, and that's how chain reaction starts. So we use radium rods, um, uh, thorium rods or radium rods to put it inside this nuclear reactor to stop this chain reaction. Otherwise this nuclear reactor is going to turn into a nuclear bomb. So that's exactly what's happening here. All this loading is synchronous. It's a nuclear bomb actually, and you need to stop this nuclear to turn into a nuclear bomb. So what you have to do is you have to inject another bootstrap variant here. The property name is data SAP UI preload asynchronous, which will then indicate the bootstrap to load these resources asynchronously. Okay, so let me show you first what happening here behind the scene when you're loading app. Press F12 and let's go to network tab. Yeah, and watch out, I just do a refresh and you would see here, guys, see one after another. See these bars here in this section. So everything is like loading one after another. So this bar is actually indicating that everything is really loading one after another. See, guys, this guy I'm talking about. Let me just take it on the right little bit. Yes. So interestingly, focus on this waterfall, and you see, so once this part got completed loading, next part starts, and then this part gets loaded completely, next part starts, and subsequently next part starts, and subsequently next part. So literally, all these initial libraries which you have or initial resources which you have, they are actually loading right one after another in a queue, your nuclear reaction actually. So that's very very dangerous. You see all this library preload. Here it's loading SAP UI core, then you have SAP M, and then we have SAP UI layout, and then we have maybe UI table, probably the theme will be there. So all these libraries are loading in synchronous way, which is dangerous. Yeah, really dangerous. So now if you really want to, what do we do? How can we really improve? And look at here, click on this button, hide overview, and you see now everything is like on time access, it's showing loading, taking a quite long time. Together overall time is being increased actually on this kind of loading. Yeah, so now what do we do to solve this? So that's where the question comes. If you're using your own, you have coded every single line of code like this, then you should add this variant. And let me show you. So we add, say, data SAP UI preload equals to async. Yeah. So I just put that here now, and watch out, guys, the impact of this. Now everything which you put here, probably some of those things which you are putting, like which is forcing things to load asynchronously, which means system won't wait. System will now make a call to SAP UI5 framework in the CDN and say, hey, please start loading these libraries asynchronously, and system will continue and it will hit your code, script tag code. Now, by the time it hits this code, if the SAP UI core is unloaded, because it's an asynchronous one, all right? It's asynchronous loading. And you don't know whether by the time your control reach to this piece of code, whether the UI core is loaded or not. You don't know, yeah? You don't know, it's asynchronous now. So, ये load अगर नहीं हुआ यहाँ पे, if this doesn't get loaded by this time code reaches here, this statement which you've written here is going to start throwing an error. Okay, it'll start throwing an error saying that, hey, I don't know what is this SAP UI core, because now you have enabled the asynchronous loading, and this loading at times depends on network speed and a lot of other factors, as I mentioned. And by the time if your control code reaches here, it doesn't wait now, it just triggers and it continues. So by the time it comes here, if your UI core not loaded, system will give you an error that I don't find UI core. So then to avoid this situation, we use a callback implementation, which I'll show you in a second. But first now, let's observe the moment we put this, what happens. This is the real big piece, which you must add it to your app and let the UI5 take care of rest of the part, loading in parallel. So now I'm going to come back, press F12, and look at the network tab, and then let's press refresh. And now watch out, guys, on the time axis, you would observe that most of the chunks which were initially getting loaded, and watch out this piece of code here, waterfall. Watch out here. See, guys, a lot of these things have actually started at same time. Yeah, their time access pay, they're most of these things, whichever, possibly, they are all, you see these two pieces, they all started together. So these loading of these libraries, almost they are all parallelized, they're loading almost at same time, and that really helps you improving the performance. Okay, and the overall performance of initial app loading increases, performance time reduces, sorry, the time taken to initially load this stuff is reduced significantly. But now you see my app doesn't work. All right, as I told you the reason, it is asynchronous, and then system would give you an error that it doesn't find SAP UI core, because by this time it hit the code, your code, actual code, SAP UI core, the library itself is not loaded, it's asynchronous now. So वो आगे बढ़ गया और उसने यहाँ hit कर दिया. By the time library did not load in the browser, and then it threw an error. Okay, so how do we avoid this situation? As I told you, to avoid handle the asynchronous processing, the best way is either use promises or use callbacks. So we have a built-in callback provided by SAP. It's called attach init. So it's called SAP UI get core. That's a core library for SAP UI 5. And then you'd say attach init, and then you have a callback function inside. So just put a function, and that's our callback function. Awesome. So this piece of code is actually doing the same stuff. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of code and put it inside this callback function. And that's what exactly attach init function is all about, guys. I'm sure you had this question in the past, Anubhav. What is this attach init? We are observing that they're doing something of this sort. What does this mean? This is actually an asynchronous, it's a callback function. which will trigger once all the asynchronous loading of your UI5 resources is complete. Yeah, so that's what this code is doing actually. Every single line of code, guys, this is my motto: never ever copy paste the code, and never learn from trainers who are teaching you copy paste, because they will simply copy paste and run away. They will take examples from internet, which you can also do it if you just know how to install WebIDE. You can also copy paste, build the app and run away, right? So never learn from such trainers who teaches you copy paste of code. They are just getting away from their responsibility. You should write every single line of code so you understand the meaning of every line of code. So when you go to production system or at times in maintenance project, you can understand what's written there and you can fix it. So come back, asynchronous loading is there, and now we have a callback which makes sure that our code hits only once the loading is complete. However, all the loading is now parallel and asynchronous. Refresh and let's see. So now voila, you see the app loads much faster, plus on top of it app loads because we have a callback in place attached in it. I hope you enjoyed this one. Very important piece of code. Now let's look at some more advanced stuff. So what about view loading? So if you come back, let's also observe about views. So I'm going to press F12 and now I just refresh again. And let's go to network tab. And I'm just going to come to network tab and I will ask network, hey, please tell me what about my views. So I come here and I will just click on search. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I just click on filter and I will just enter here XML because all my views are XML. And look at here again, the similar pattern ek ke baad ek. See, once first view got loaded, then second view, then third view, and then fourth view, and then so they are all babies which are coming one after another in a synchronous way. They are not parallelized again. Okay, so that's again problem. Asynchronous, they are loading synchronously, which is again time consuming. So how do we solve this? Again, very easy. Just go to the manifest.json where you have routing configuration for the views. Come down and we have learned it, all of these concepts in our course, how to create this manifest and stuff like that. Now I just come here and I just put async for the root view as true. And also I will just go and put here the configuration for routing. So in the routing configuration, you put it as true. Also put the same to the root view. Yahan pe. Two places, just to do it at two places. And now watch out. Come back, just put those two changes and now come back and refresh. And now we will observe the loading of my views. How will that be? Yeah. So now when you come back, watch out here. Amazing stuff. Amazing. See, your views almost got loaded in parallel. It's not one after another now. So your view 1, view 2, and app view, which are your main views, they almost got loaded absolute parallel. Yeah, absolute parallel. Earlier you were seeing them, very definite difference in their synchronous processing, and now you see almost all of these are parallelized and they're loading them in asynchronous way. System is not waiting for the one view to load and then start loading next. It doesn't. Okay, it simply starts loading everything pretty much in parallel, and asynchronous way doesn't freeze the UI, and also loading time reduces significantly. Similarly, the component controller, which you are coding in index.html, you can also load this guy asynchronously. So just come here to your component controller, component container, and you're gonna put again a property called async is true. That's all you have to do, and this will then also not wait for whole of the stuff to get complete. Rather, this is also, so every possible call here which you see is actually turning to be asynchronous, which is really helping us at big time. So now let us go ahead and see another interesting factor here for performance improvement. So we learned most of these things about performance improvement. What about OData service? So guys, we know that any OData service, what are the best practices for OData service? So here we already saw what options we saw here is using Let me just quickly note down so you can recall. By the way, this PPT link is given in the description of this video below. You can go ahead and download this PPT and also present this to your development team if you're working as a architect in Fiori area. This will definitely increase your impression on the team that you really a knowledgeable guy. Okay, utilize my PPT as it is, and then present it to everybody in your team to make them aware about these performance guidelines and best practices. Awesome. Okay, now first one we saw was the usage of SAP UI. So that was this one, asynchronous loading. And to avoid loading errors, use callback as attach init. And then we have seen asynchronous loading of the component. So we have talked about asynchronous loading of views, asynchronous loading of component container. So there are some more new syntaxes like component itself also can be loaded asynchronously. So like in this here, we have a new approach called .create method. And then in the create method, you can pass the name of this guy here, and then you can have a promise-based approach, which is called then. So now this is also asynchronous. The UI component itself, once it's loaded properly, then only it will call the further processing moving on. So that's, you can also explore it a little bit in the link given there already. You can explore that, and you can also convert this to an asynchronous base. So these are all main important areas you should focus. Don't use the jQuery.sap.require. The another approach which we also typically follow, let's say, for example, in the controller, if you need a control, okay, you need a control. For example, I would need a control for maybe a button. So in this case, I never used a button actually. Yeah, but this one I've used here, display list item. So this guy, which you're putting here, this will again force system to go at this point of time and load the module. But if you're 100% sure that display list item will be required for sure, 100%, put this on the top in the module here. But if you think it may be needed or may not be needed, when user click on it, then only we need it, go with sap.ui.require, which I taught you in EMD like syntax. Awesome. Now the last one comes here is about OData service. So guys, we all know that metadata is so important for any OData service integration. Without this metadata, UI cannot really understand what is the data, what is the format of the data, and how to represent this data to the end user. Literally, UI cannot understand that. So this is so important that we load SAP OData service metadata as early as possible. Even without loading the view, without loading anything else, you can immediately store or reload or load the metadata of the OData service. And that's where another addition for OData comes into picture here, which will say preload is equals to true. So for model, you would have seen this called preload is equals to true. Now what happens is earlier, okay, let me show you first. When is the metadata for OData got loaded? So come back, press F12, and my focus is now going to be $metadata. And I just reload the app and watch out. Oops. So you see metadata got loaded. When it got loaded, let's count the sequence quickly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So around 19th position or 20th position, you see this OData metadata got loaded. And now I just go back and just add this syntax preload is true, which will then ask system, hey, it's okay to go ahead and load the OData service metadata faster before earlier, whatever you're loading, maybe prioritize this one, because without this, there is no life. Okay, this is like oxygen for a real-time Fiori app, because you need this very importantly. So now prioritize this loading of metadata. I don't know when, but please load it faster as soon as possible. As soon as you get time, just load it, man. Okay, so now earlier it was 20th position, and I come back and refresh and just check it out. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and almost same position, guys. But yeah, at times what happens is system will prioritize loading of metadata as soon as system feel that yes, it can be loaded before anything else. So the moment you click on the tile in the launchpad, there are 100 other services like notification service, search service, me area, extensibility service, a lot of things gets loaded. Yeah, so we want to prioritize our metadata loading of the OData service, and that's what exactly that statement does. Preload is true, which you should ideally keep it for the OData model at least, to tell the system, hey, please prioritize metadata loading. So now, more advanced performance guidelines, if you would like to understand, please go back and look at this PPT here. I have put these advanced performance link here. Now, coming to this last 2 point, pagination and server side, let's discuss about them quickly. So in the pagination, basically, we will say to the system, hey, don't load all the data in one shot. Maybe your Mara table has billion records. So if the system starts loading all billion records, by default, it will never work. So we have to apply pagination. We learned this already in our course. And that's something which we do it via the growing property at the list control level. So when you have a list control, probably you define the pagination size and enable it with the packet size using these two properties. Awesome. The next important point is server-side preparation for analytics. So at times I've seen people, they want to load some analytics, let's say customer count. So what they do, they load all the customers first from the backend to the JavaScript code, and then they loop over it to count the customers. Bad idea. Why do you need to load all 500 records and their respective values to count the records? You should ideally do this in the app layer, and with ABAP on HANA, ideally this should be pushed down even to HANA. So for more detail about analytic app creation with CDS view and annotation based application, where we utilize the concept of ABAP on HANA and code to data paradigm, please subscribe my ABAP on HANA training. But make sure the golden rule is never do looping in the front end side. You should always try to loop it on the back end side. And as far as possible as you should do it as part of your database itself if you're using HANA DB. So more interesting knowledge and more courses you would like to know, definitely this is one stop place for all your learning, latest techniques, latest updated content every time, which will make you ahead of your colleagues. If you like this video, please do share it with your team, with your colleagues. Do download this presentation which I have. There are a lot of free videos I'm offering as part of Anubhav Learning series. This is my commitment back to all of you. Don't feel free to join our forums, where a lot of interesting discussions happening on UI5, including job posting from different companies. They are coming and posting their jobs here. You can do contact the employers directly on UI5 Fiori at different countries: Australia, UK, US, China, Ukraine, Japan, wherever you want to go, in anywhere. Definitely, if you feel there is a job opening in your company, please do let us know. You can create a post here, and then people will definitely apply for that. I'm sure at least I've seen a lot of students, my students who were trained by me, they get a very good opportunity. At times they get four offers in their hand, and then they ask me, Anubhav, which one to choose, which one to go for. I just simply guide them which one to go for. So this miracle happens when you actually invest in your learning. You have to invest both, so importantly, the time to your learning, so that you can be ahead of it, because these days you see not much of ABAP progressing good in the market. ABAP developers are not highly paid anymore. There's a very less demand for Web Imprint, BSP and Portal, BOBI, BW. All these areas are now turning to be going in with the ABAP on HANA or SAP UI5 Fiori with the cloud deployment options. So then it makes sense to learn these technologies. With that, it's a wrap. If you like this video, please do let me know in the comment box. What do you feel? Do you want me to create more videos like this? Please do like this video and subscribe to this channel to do not miss these powerful videos on YouTube. With that, this is a sign off from Anubhav. Thank you so much for being there as usual, and keep watching, keep loving, keep liking. Thank you so much. Goodbye.